My wife Janet and I have been married for 5 years, and since we are both professionals, we have no family. Janet looks great in anything she wears, but when she dresses up, she looks fantastic. Last year, the holiday parties were held at a nice hotel, booked into suites. The idea being we could all drink and be merry without worrying about driving afterward. My boss Carlos is from Spain originally, and is a very charismatic man who seems to make friends instantly. During the evening, he struck up a couple of conversations with us on topics from how lovely Janet looked tonight to work issues. I had been vying for a promotion to a managerial position in the engineering department, and he discussed the candidates for the job with us. It became apparent that I wasn't his first choice, although he didn't come out and say it bluntly. He remained charming throughout the evening, but nonetheless, I could tell I wasn't going to get the position, and my wife could read the disappointment all over my face, no matter how hard I tried to hide it. Carlos wandered away to mingle some more, and Janet clasped my hand and whispered, "Oh, screw him." In a moment of frustration, I grumbled, "Yeah, well, that would probably work." My wife looked at me with a shocked expression and stammered, "I didn't mean it that way." The party started slowing down, and couples were leaving at intervals, so Janet and I headed up to our suite. My wife changed into a very pretty light blue teddy and was flirting with me in an attempt to cheer me up. I was still dressed and sulking on the couch. Janet was rubbing my shoulders when there was a knock at the door. She pulled her shorty robe on and sat back down. I secured the little metal device that prevents the door from opening fully and opened it to find Carlos standing there. "You know, I was thinking, Alex, we should discuss that position some more. This is the perfect opportunity for you to convince me you're the man for the job." I felt a rush of hope and led him into the room. He sat on the couch and I took the chair. When Carlos saw Janet's short robe, his eyes travelled over her legs and up to her face. "I am sorry to have disturbed you two, but I thought maybe you two would like a chance to affect my choice for the position." Carlos smiled brightly at me, then at my wife. Janet seemed to lock eyes with him for a moment. I was about to start pointing out the quality of my work on some of the key contracts I oversaw when my boss looked around the room as if searching for something, then smiled at me. "Alex, maybe you should run down and get us all a fresh drink before the bar closes. What do you say, Janet? Would you like Alex to get you a nightcap?" It was an odd request. I mean, a hotel this nice certainly had room service. I started to say something to that effect when Janet looked at me with a forced smile and agreed with him. "I think maybe that's a good idea, Alex." I stood, and Janet walked with me to the door. I was feeling strange about the whole thing, but Janet told me she loved me as if she was seeing me off on a long trip, kissed me, and closed the door behind me. The bar was packed with people, and the music was loud. It took better than 20 minutes to get the bartender to ignore the women in their clubbing clothes. I finally got the drinks and rode the elevator back to the room. That's when I noticed I didn't have my key card. I softly knocked on the door, but no one opened it. I tried again, but still, it was quiet in the room. I shuffled my feet a little, not really knowing what to do. I walked back up the hallway and sat on a little sofa in front of the elevators. I drank my drink, and then the door opened and my wife's head poked out. I got up and returned to the room. Janet's hair was tangled and her forehead was sweaty. Her robe was barely belted, and she looked like a frightened little girl. She took her drink and drained it on the spot. Carlos emerged from the bathroom, straightening his tie. I didn't know what to do or say. I muttered an apology for taking so long and held out his drink with the now mostly melted ice cubes. Carlos looked confused, then smiled and said, "Oh yes, thank you, Alex." He downed his drink and smiled. "Your lovely wife has convinced me that you really are the man for that position." I looked at her. Her face was flushed and glowing with sweat. She did indeed look more lovely than I had ever seen her. "Alex, enjoy the holidays and come see me first thing next week, and we will work out the details." Carlos shook my hand in an iron grip and then gently took Janet's hand, and turning it up, he kissed her wrist while looking into her eyes. Janet had a soft smile on her face for a moment, and I even thought I saw her lean towards him slightly. Then she self-consciously adjusted her robe and tightened the belt. After Carlos left, Janet hugged me, and I saw she was crying. She looked at me as if stricken and said she was sorry, so sorry, over and over. I held her and stroked her back. "What just happened, honey?" I asked. Janet looked at me and whispered, "I knew what he wanted. I wanted to help you, so I let him." I spoke up. "It's okay, honey. I would never have asked you to do something like that. In fact, had I caught on earlier, I would have stopped it." Suddenly, I noticed the hickey on her neck. I saw how she was moving gingerly. "Did he get rough?" I asked. Janet looked at me a moment, then said, No, it's not that, honey. He was just so..." She stopped. "What? He's what?" Janet looked at me strangely, paused as if to find a new word, and replied, "Passionate. He was just so passionate." I tried to insert some humor and pointed to the marks on her neck. "I see that," I chuckled half-heartedly. Janet looked in the mirror and turned up the collar to hide them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered yet again. When I pulled the covers back, there was not one but two very large wet spots on the bed. Janet looked sheepish at me, pulled the second sheet back over them, and climbed into bed. I lay awake all night, shocked and confused by what had happened and the fact it somehow made me aroused. Janet went to sleep as if exhausted. I got the promotion and a nice corner office with a window. Over the next couple of weeks, things went back to normal, and none of us ever mentioned what happened that night. The first week after the party, Janet complained of premenstrual cramps, and we did not make love that week or the next. But after that, we returned to our normal life. Janet was a lot more animated in bed, though. She made love like she was in a struggle. She was, passionate. I have to admit, I had more than one fantasy about the event and never failed to imagine it. About 2 months after my promotion, I came home from work and found Janet freshly showered and wrapped in a towel. She seemed in a hurry to get in her pajamas and avoided looking at me or getting too close. Later that evening, I opened a bottle of wine and we watched a movie. Janet relaxed and we cuddled until bedtime. When the movie was over, we went up to bed. Janet stood for a moment, looking at me, biting her lip, then said, "Honey, Carlos was here this afternoon." I looked at her, not quite understanding. "Here?" "He was here. What did he want?" I stammered. Lowering her eyes, Janet whispered, "It's the 4th time he has come here since the party." My wife unbuttoned her pajamas top and let it fall to the floor. Both her breasts had large sucker bites around the nipples. Janet's bottoms followed them to the floor, and as she crawled into bed, I saw her pretty little slit was red and puffy. We kissed and held each other. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Just a little. He's a lot bigger." He is kind of big, but I'm used to him now." The thought that my boss was screwing my wife on a regular basis, and that Janet not only was letting him, but commented he was bigger than mine, sent me right over the edge way too soon and left her unsatisfied. As I was laying there feeling a little inferior, I couldn't help but ask, "How big is he?" "It's not like I measured it," Janet shot back. As I laid there, I felt a rhythmic motion beside me and noticed that my wife was moving in a large circular motion. Her head was thrown back, and her eyes were closed. Janet's lips were parted in a silent moan. She looked so sexy and enthralled with what she was doing. My wife's movement became faster, and she arched her back in ecstasy as she was rocked with what I failed to give her. When she recovered, Janet smiled at me and pulled me close, whispering that it was okay and we would work things out. "I think you're turned on by the whole thing, aren't you?" my wife asked. "Yeah, I guess I am, a little," I admitted. Janet smirked and told me she would be seeing Carlos on Friday, and she would ask him to take a picture so I could see just what he was pleasuring her with.